everybody. Wow, what a car. If you call it a car. Actually, this car was state-of-the-art 25 years ago in the former communist so-called German Democratic Republic. And 26 years ago, if you wanted to own one of these cars, you had to wait up to 12 years till you finally got this car. For me personally, this was first time I ever had the chance to drive one of these Trabis, the GDR car, by myself. So actually, it needed the NOAH conference, the conference about innovation and new technologies, to give me this chance. Thanks to you, NOAH. One thing is for sure, this car has got neither any self-driving technology, nor it is an Uber limousine. And this is exactly what tonight we want to talk about, the future of mobility. And who could do this better than these two guys? The CEO of Daimler, Zetsche, and the CEO of Uber, Travis Kalanick. Welcome. As a child, he went in Los Angeles from door to door and sold sets of knives. With his company Uber, he has sold 1 million car rides so far. And he created the most valuable startup in the whole world. With his company, he not only created a new service, but he created a new lifestyle. Sharing is the new black. The young consumers, they want to use, but they don't want to own anymore. But what the consumer wants is not necessarily what the EU wants. So, is Europe's and Europe's regulation the biggest enemy of innovation? Give a warm welcome to Travis Kalanick. The stage is yours.
Look, it's really good to be here in Berlin. I've been to Berlin many times. It's the first time it's been warm. I live in Los Angeles, so that feels like home. I just want to stay here now. So look, it's really amazing to be here, really amazing to be on stage with of course, Kai and Dieter. A lot of, basically we have entrepreneurs and CEOs, and you know, we're going to talk about the future of mobility. It's going to be exciting. I'm certainly excited. But in my presentation, I'm going to start with what I call the future of human-driven transportation, how we can reduce pollution, reduce congestion, make our cities more livable, and we do it with people. And with the technology in our pockets, yeah, I'm talking about a smartphone, not a self-driving car. And so I'll start with, well, the beginnings of Uber. This is a romantic shot of my co-founder and myself in front of the Eiffel Tower. It's when we came up with the idea for Uber. We could not, people who've been to Paris before Uber know that if you were in Paris in the evening, before Uber, you weren't getting home by car. You were getting home by walking. And my co-founder said, I just want to push a button and get a ride. And so we created that, and it was just really humble beginnings, and we brought that back to San Francisco. But what we didn't realize is, when we first got started, was how big this could be. We just didn't know. But as we started doing literally tens of millions of rides, hundreds of millions of rides a month, what we started to see is the impact. And that impact started to affect cities in a very positive way. And the reason why is because, well, we got 1 billion cars on the planet right now. And that's actually created quite a big problem that we've just sort of gotten used to. And so those billion cars, of course, they are not all in the US. So Germans are, of course, big lovers of cars too. But they are everywhere. And what we know, of course, is that across Europe, US, et cetera, people love their cars. It's about mobility. It's about getting where they want to go. And this is the number of passenger vehicles per 1,000 people. But what we also know is that all this private car ownership has a very public cost. People sit in traffic for hours a day. Today in the EU, well, in Germany specifically, 4 of the 10 most congested cities are here in Germany. There's people just sitting behind the wheel, grabbing onto that steering wheel, frustrated, maybe a little bit tense about getting to work, and spending that time, instead of being relaxed, well, being anxious. The congestion costs of just literally when you're stopped and not moving, just being stopped and not moving in traffic, is 1% of the GDP of the EU, 100 billion euro per year. And those cars that are sitting in traffic are, of course, responsible for 12% of the CO2 emissions that Europe generates, and obviously polluting the air and making our Earth a little bit less green. But that problem of traffic is actually only 4% of the problem, because 96% of the time your car is sitting idle, because you're only driving somewhere 4% of the day. And that means we have to store these billion cars somewhere. And in cities around the world, 15, 20, sometimes even 30% of our land is used to store these cars. We even have skyscrapers for cars. And so mayors across the EU and really around the world have had to deal with this problem of taking up all the land and the problem of congestion and the quality of life ramifications that it has. And they've had pretty good solutions, well, decent solutions. It's called mass transit. Mass transit moves lots of people very efficiently, but for some reason it just doesn't actually solve the entire problem. Why not? Well, because mass transit just can't go to everybody's doorstep. Right? To make it go to everybody's doorstep might cost hundreds of billions of euro just for a single city. And so we still have our cars. There's still hundreds of thousands or millions of cars that come into a city every day, even when there's great mass transit, like a city like Berlin. 37% of all people that are coming into the city are coming in their own car every day. And so that's when Uber comes in, is that, well, what if I could push a button and get a ride wherever I go? What kind of ways in which, how can we work with mass transit? So in the center of London, for instance, we know mass transit works pretty well. But what about the outside of London, right? As you get further and further out from the center of the city, you also get a situation where it's harder and harder for mass transit to go to everybody, and more expensive infrastructure investments to make that work. And so what we see in London, in the outer boroughs, is that 30% of the rides begin or end 200 meters or less to a transit stop. And so we complement mass transit systems, and quite often when I'm getting around cities, and I travel quite a bit, I'm taking the subway or I'm taking a bus somewhere, and then hopping off and then taking an Uber for the last mile. In Paris, 10% of all of our trips begin or end in underprivileged zones, zones that are underserved by mass transit and often lower income. There's a high correlation between lower income neighborhoods and a lack of mass transit. And that's a problem, because if you need a job, you need to work, not having access to your city makes things pretty difficult. Or having access to your city, but there's so many connections and, well, it takes 2 or 3 hours to get to where you're going, can be also pretty problematic. And of course, right here is the graphs of Uber usage in cities across the EU. And what we see is the biggest, the highest volume times on our system are around midnight and sometimes a little bit later. Depends on the city. As you see, Paris goes a little bit later than everybody else. What that means, well, why is that? Well, guess what? Mass transit doesn't really work very well late at night. In many cities, it just turns off. And so that's when we see our system really go into high gear, is when mass transit isn't an option. And in this way, we're very complementary for those types of systems. But we still have our cars, and we still need to get around them. And so in many ways, as we started to get bigger in various cities, we started to ask the question, can we actually use cars? In an intuitive way, can we use cars to actually reduce congestion? And so we started looking at all the cars that were out there, and you see all these cars, and there's one person in the car and 4 empty seats. What if all these cars became shared cars? Could we divide by 2 the number of cars that were on the road? And so we tried. In San Francisco, our first city, our home city, where of course it's one of our biggest cities because it's been around the longest, or 6 years old now, we said, look, there are so many people that are pushing a button and getting a ride, and they're doing the same ride at the same time. And it was a couple years ago, we would send 2 cars to pick up 2 people that were getting picked up in the same place and going to the same destination. We said, could we make those 2 requests such that they basically became one? Could it be that I push a button, the car comes, and I open the door just like before, and there's somebody else already in the car going to the same place I am? Would people be willing to share a car? And like my product managers we would debate this before we launched, and nobody really knew, but I said, guys, there's this thing called a bus. People are used to sharing vehicles. It's a thing. And they're like, yeah, but when you're in the back of the car, does it get awkward? Well, maybe. But we tried. And what we found was that in San Francisco, well, today now, we're doing 40% of all of our trips in San Francisco are Uber pool trips, 40%. And San Francisco is almost a $1 billion a year city for us. And so on the left is all the separate trips, what our traffic looked like in San Francisco. This is Uber traffic. The colored lights are where the traffic was most intense. And then when we introduced Uber Pool and scaled it, what the traffic looks like after. And so what you end up having is more people getting served by fewer cars. And what you end up having is less congestion, less cars on the road, less pollution, and a better city because of it. And so we started rolling out in a bunch of different cities. Like I said, I'm from Los Angeles, it's my hometown. Everybody drives there, but it took off there too. In the first 8 months, we did almost 8 million fewer miles on the roads, 1.4 thousand metric tons of CO2 saved in the first 8 months. Now, we're much bigger now, and probably doing this, maybe even multiples of this at this point. And in China, we're doing 30 million Uber Pool trips per month. That's 1 million, shouldn't say 500,000. That's 1 million Uber Pool trips per day. It kills me to think that people are taking a picture of this slide because the math doesn't work. Stop, put your phones down. Okay. And so we've rolled it out around the world, and really in our biggest cities that we serve. And we now have 18 cities, each of them with over 100,000 people carpooling, Uber pooling every week. Now remember, carpooling, this is not like a new idea. It's not like something that Uber invented. That's for sure. We did not. It's been around, well, I was in Moscow before Berlin, and they may have invented this, okay? But it's never really taken off. And so when you can go to a mayor and say, I, in a matter of months, can get 100,000 people carpooling that weren't carpooling before, That makes a difference. It's a big deal. And today, now 20% of all of our trips globally are Uber pool trips, shared rides. And so this is not a picture of a suburb anywhere in Europe. This is actually a picture of my house, my hometown. And it's traditional sort of suburban America, and what would happen in the mornings when I was a kid is all these cars would back out of their driveways at the same time. They'd all turn this way, and they'd all go in a line. Many of them, guess what, going to the same place, right? And so the question is like, wow, what could we, a lot of people get how Uber Pool works, and a lot of people are using it, and it's commercial drivers, and that's great, but what if we could turn all these people backing out of their driveways and turn them into Uber drivers just going to work? What would happen if we could make that happen, right? Like a city like New York, for instance, there's 2 million cars going over those bridges into Manhattan every day, even though it has a wonderful mass transit system. If you could do something like this, you could really change the city. You could really change the traffic picture and the pollution picture. And so the idea is, well, what if I could just have my coffee, go in my car, turn on my app, and on my way to work, pick a neighbor up who's going basically to the same destination. We'd love to do it. And like I said, carpooling is not a new thing. It really started getting popular in media when the oil crisis of the 70s happened, because, man, we need to share this car because that gas is super expensive. The thing is it never really took off because, well, first, there was no technology that could coordinate this kind of interest of people going to the same place at the same time. Who were these people, and how do we match them efficiently? And that's why it was just never convenient enough. But there was also the incentive piece. So today we have that technology, but we don't have the incentives. What happens is, well, if you make a profit taking somebody somewhere, you are now a commercial driver, and you must have a commercial license. And this is pretty much the way it works in all cities around the world. In the US, there's a mark of what commercial means. It's 54 cents per mile. Here, it might be like 30 cents per kilometer, something around there. And if you make less than 30 cents per kilometer, then you're non-commercial, and you could pick somebody up on your way to work, no problem. If you made 31 cents, and I'm approximating here, it depends where and what city, then you are a commercial driver, you must have a license, and if you don't, you are committing a crime. And so this is the kind of, we need to fix that incentive because, well, if you're just going 10 kilometers down the road, there's not enough incentive to go pick somebody up and then drop them off and then go on your way to work. And if there was just a little more of a profit incentive, then what happens is people just naturally go and pick somebody up. And it can be a bit of a community service where the incentives are aligned. And it's not a subsidy that's necessary from cities, it just happens. And so it's exciting to think about these prospects. Uber Commute is our next big thing. And really what it's about is turning our cities into greener cities. It's about giving 20% of the land back to the city. It's about cleaning the air. It's about actually also creating tens of thousands of jobs in every city we're in. And the idea is basically through shared rides, we can make cities better and we can reclaim our cities. So very glad to be here. Super excited about the prospect of bringing Uber Commute and Uber Pool to more cities in Europe. And I guess I'll be up here with Dieter and Kai later.
Thank you, Travis. Ladies and gentlemen, some people call him Mr. Daimler. Others call him the fabulous Dr. Zetsche. In any case, one thing is for sure, without any doubts, Dieter Zetsche is one of the most successful CEOs in Germany. He says, nowadays I'm having more fun in my job than the last 40 years before. And the reason for this good mood, I think, has to do with his excellent figures. Last year, Daimler made revenues about 150 billion and the profit was around 9 billion euros. But what does it mean for him? What does it mean for his company if more and more people decide, yes, they would like to drive in a car, but they don't want to own it? All of a sudden, it's not enough anymore just to build the best cars in the world. The competitors are not BMW or Audi anymore. The competitors are Google, Apple, and probably Uber. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Dieter Zetsche. Du bleibst dann gleich oben.
Thanks, Kai, and good afternoon or good evening to all of you. I'm very glad to be with you here at this conference and to speak with you or to you about the revolution, a revolution in the automotive industry. Some 200 years ago, the most favorite tools of people going for a revolution was the guillotine. These days, it's somewhat different. It's more likely the internet. And there are many industries which, if they don't adapt fast to the new environment of the internet, are highly threatened, mostly existentially. Take as one example the hair wax industry. Obviously, it doesn't need any explanation. You see, when Kai went to the Silicon Valley, everything changed ever since. I must admit, though, that I, years before that, already dropped hair wax, but for different reasons. So, as I acknowledge that this conference is not a hairstyling conference, I want to focus on autos. You're not surprised, I guess. And I'm very confident to prove with the next photo that Daimler will lead the digital revolution. I guess that Travis was convinced anyway that big corp IT departments would look like that. The point is that this picture has been taken 30 years ago. And it not only proves that we tried to set a trend for moustaches even at that time, but it proves as well that more than 30 years ago, we were running our first autonomous cars. It was a van on the Autobahn, and with the tools we had at that time, we were driving the digital background to have this van successfully and driverless make its way on the Autobahn. So that's how far we're going back in that technology. And once again, that's why we do believe that we are well prepared for the tremendous change which lies ahead of us. And I now want to talk about 3 different cars to make that point. I would like to start with the new E-Class. This is obviously a series production car, and it's available in the showrooms, and it's today almost autonomously driving car. It's the first public, or the first car which got a license in Nevada for full autonomous testing. And the point is that this car, a production car, has no changes on its hardware to do so, and very minor modifications on the software to be fully automated in testing in Nevada. So this car is able to do a lot, much more than it's allowed to do at that point of time on German roads and many other, or almost all other roads as well. It's obviously able to operate semi-autonomously on basically all roads. It can change lanes to pass vehicles autonomously. In critical situations, it can detect these critical situations and it brakes, it steers autonomously around the obstacles. It is the first car with car-to-X communication, so it can warn other vehicles from any hazardous situations which are around the corner. And you can park it outside of the car with your app, just driving it in the next available parking space or getting out of it. So how did we get there? Actually, step by step, by always improving our assistance systems, which in the first place are meant to increase the safety of our customers, to prevent accidents from happening. And we did that step by step, and the benefit is that people got used to it. And that's extremely important because many technologies are prevented from execution by lack of trust of people, of customers, of potential customers. One good example is when we go back to the year 1865, when in the UK the Red Flag Act was enacted. This was a new regulation which required road locomotives, as they were called, to adhere to a speed limit which was defined by a man who had to walk ahead of this road locomotive to define the speed as a maximum of walking speed. I think it's pretty important to mention that thereby the Brits invented a regulation for cars before the car was invented. And they did that, that's in light of Brexit, pretty interesting, before Brussels even existed in its current form. So, therefore, it's so important that with the new E-Class, we are able to prepare their general public to build up trust in these autonomous cars. I mean, you all have speed controls, you don't even think about it, to use them to define the speed of your car, even if they are distronic and keep the distance. You are not worried about that because you're used to it. And this will happen with autonomous cars altogether, step by step. The next car I would like to talk about is the F015. This is a fully autonomous car, which we have shown first in Las Vegas 1.5 years ago. And this one is not available in the showroom today, but will be in the not too far future. While we have for 130 years developed the individual mobility as a form of freedom for people, freedom of space to go where they want to go, because of the situation which we just saw in Travis' presentation, we now want to give people back their time. Today, and we just heard that in principle, the average German driver spends 2.5 years of his life in the car. Some part of that is a lot of fun, but some part of it definitely not. And we want to give this time back to people who are sitting in the car, stuck in these kind of roadblocks we were just seeing on the charts before. And we do that by the fully autonomous car, and on that basis, you can do whatever you want in the car. You can communicate with everybody, do video conferences, just listen to music, sleep, whatever you want. And we are convinced that in the future, space and time are the real luxury goods. And this car is designed to offer as much as possible of these two elements. Now, when we talk about the fully autonomous cars, of course, it's extremely important that they are 100% reliable. And today, we are already there when it comes to normal conditions. So a car like this can, with its sensors, its cameras, its radars, detect, its lasers, all these objects and can interpret and understand them. Blue are the cars, then they see the pedestrians. obviously, either there's a pedestrian standing on this monument or it's a statue, but they're pretty close to reality in all of what we are doing, and that's our current car, how we use it. But the same sensors under different conditions have a much tougher time when we are here. So while on the one hand, humans, who 90% of them think that they are better than average in their driving skills, in fact provide 9 of 10 accidents because of their own mistakes, we are very far in preventing these accidents from happening. But in between these accidents, for instance, on German autobahns, people go 7 million kilometers statistically without an accident and do the same good job as the average people do with autonomous car is quite a challenge. And that's why we have to, even under those conditions, be perfectly fine and reliable with all of our sensors. The sensors are the senses of the car. As important, of course, is the brain of the car. And that's another very exciting development. For a long period of time, we tried to automate things by adding up thousands of rules, how these things should react in certain situations. And for instance, Google had a program which was based on these rules, which was able in 2 weeks to figure out that in their YouTube videos, most of them showed cats. And they were able to understand this is a cat with all these rules which they got. But meanwhile, we're able, with deep learning, to apply what the brain does, which means connect their synapses in the form that they learn from experience and build on that. That, for instance, this image detection now can work in minutes. When they just see a few cats, they learn that is a cat by looking at the similarities and the differences. And while these neurological systems, as we just saw briefly in the picture before, are very complex to explain, we are simple and clear, meanwhile, how to use and how to apply them. And the picture or the little video you saw before has shown that by now we can, in our cars, have these deep learning algorithms which understand what is a car, what is a tree, and you program that once, and then you go on the street in Berlin or in Shanghai and wherever, and they still understand, even if you drive right or left in Great Britain or somewhere, what is happening, because they don't need the rules, they learn. And that is the important part which happens now with these deep learning algorithms, which across the board enable us to do many unthinkable things now in reality. And this is what will drive autonomous driving to reality in very few years as full autonomous cars. And we have very high skills in this regard. We have hundreds of people in our company who work in this field and to make us, I'm pretty much convinced at that point of time, within the car industry, the leading manufacturer of autonomous car developments. But we know that we are not the only ones working on that, whether it's Google or whether it's Uber, and therefore this is not our benchmark anymore. The rest of the car industry, we see other people challenging us, and that's a good thing because competition ultimately drives progress. I would like to talk about a third car, which is our Car2Go. We have, meanwhile, 1.3 million customers. We have 15,000 vehicles, and we are the world's biggest provider for free-floating car sharing. And for instance, here in Berlin, we will now in July start to add Mercedes cars, so far these are smarts, to these fleets as well to even further grow that business for us. Of course, this is just one element. We have many other aspects which have the overall objective to drive our company, and this is not just our objective, of course, from a car OEM to a mobility provider. Other elements which we use are, for instance, Movil, a system where you just go where from A to B you want to go. and then it offers you all the different transportation modes you can choose from, and different times it takes, different costs it's provide, or you have to pay for, and then you can choose one and click and pay for it, and you go. And it will show you then with the navigation where to find the first, whatever it is, S-Bahn or bus or car to go, or whatever you are looking for. We have My Taxi, we have Black Lane, we have a number of things which we pursue in order to learn about these new possibilities. And of course, only when you connect all these dots, you come to a real systematic approach. Now, many people ask for good reason, well, how will you ever earn money with these mobility services? But when you really think about it and think about the future, you better ask the question, how will you, without these services in the future, still make money? Because we think they're essential in the transformation with individual mobility will take to be part of that. And definitely, we want to be at the forefront and want to create this change rather than being changed and then obviously helpless with whatever might happen. We are absolutely convinced that our industry will change dramatically, and definitely Uber is one driving force in this change. And therefore, I was not surprised that when some of the media reported about our meeting here on stage, that they were seeing that as some kind of a fight. Headlines where Travis and Zetsche, the duel. I have to admit, it took me 3 weeks of workout till I was ready for that picture. But in any case, what is this relationship we're having with each other? And of course, we have met many times before. I think the best description was created by Kai when he was talking about frenemies, which is obviously something where some people said to me, friend and enemy in one. We call that marriage in Germany. But so my definition is that Travis and myself, we are competitors, of course, and there might be many areas in the future where we compete with or against each other, but at the same time, we are friends and we are cooperating and talking about things we can do together. And I think that is the best way to win the future, and that is probably the best starting point to enter now into our mutual Q&A with Kai. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dieter, Travis. So we've got 5 minutes left for the talk now. So the questions have to be short and the answers even shorter. And let's try and dig somehow deeper into your relation. Travis, the biggest promise you give with Uber is that you will bring down the number of cars on the streets. Do you have any proof for this? First question. And second, how do you think Dieter feels about this vision? Bringing down the number of cars. Or you're just talking about BMW cars?
I'm just talking, actually, I'm not going to answer that question. You know, look, in China alone, we're talking about 30 million trips a month that are Uber pooled. Those are clear situations where you have 2 cars. You would have had 2 cars with 2 people and became 1 car. And you also saw our, the sort of visual for San Francisco.
China is one of his most important markets. So
Yes.
if you bring down the number of cars on the streets of China, you don't make Dieter happy.
What you could say is that when you share the cost of a car, you can afford a nicer car.
That makes a lot of sense. Dieter, does it?
I'm a big fan of the Viano, personally. I come to Europe mostly for the Viano. I want to bring them to the US if we can get them, Dieter.
So are you happy with his vision, or is Uber a danger to your business model? At the end, he wants to the people to stop owning cars, and that means at the end to stop buying cars?
Well, first of all, if Travis wouldn't be so busy, I would have to ask him to come into our marketing department with that very nice answer. Well, it's not the first time that I'm confronted with this sentence. Mr. Kretschmann said at his first day in office as well that his objective is to reduce the number of cars. Talking about China with the statistics which Travis can bring, at the same time we are growing by 30–40% per year at that point of time. But anyway, of course, it makes a lot of sense to increase their use of assets, whatever kind, including cars, and when they sit 95% of the time, this is not efficient. And as this is obvious, it would be very stupid to go in defense mode and to try to explain anything different. What you have to do is to see the opportunity of technologies, which when they are disruptive always destroy something, but at the same time they create tremendous new opportunities. And that's why we try to be part of this new thing and then adjust accordingly.
But again, the car industry in Germany is not just any industry. It's the pride and it's the engine of our economy. And you said it before, you know, when I was young, my biggest dream was, when I will be 18, I want to have my own car. The own car at the age of 18 was a kind of symbol of freedom. What if nowadays the young generation, the kids, don't share these feelings, these dreams? If for them it's only important to come from point A to point B, what does it mean for the car industry?
There are 7 billion people on this world, and there are these people you're describing, no doubt. There are young kids in many places, but there are many other places where people are as excited to get a new car, as they were 50 years ago in this country. So at that point of time, it's not something which is directly affecting us, but we have to think beyond today and tomorrow, and that's why we are involved in these developments.
Travis, you are now evaluated with nearly $7 billion. This is more than BMW, and this is nearly as much as Daimler, and you probably will surpass Daimler with that evaluation in the next couple of months. Did you ever consider simply buying one of these big car companies?
You know, all you have to do is go to a German manufacturing facility or the Mercedes, the Daimler design studio, or see how these cars are made, tested, and rigorously refined, and you will very quickly realize you do not want to make cars. And what I mean by this is not that I'm from LA, I love cars, but the process of making them is no small affair. And so I think in many ways it's not for us to buy cars, it's for us to work with the folks who make cars. Cars are not going away anytime soon, and companies like Uber are not going to be making them. And so we want to partner with the best manufacturers in the world so that our customers, the riders, ultimately can have a great experience, a great mobility experience in getting around cities.
But seriously, can you explain how can a company that does not produce anything, that has not been profitable for one day in its 7-year-old history, can be evaluated at $70 billion? Why is that?
It's because, well, for instance, in the developed markets, we are profitable. Developing world, emerging markets like China, India, et cetera, were massively unprofitable. And so once you see the unit economics in a particular city and you see how we can go profitable in cities and we can do it at scale across a country or a continent, it becomes really obvious how you can stack hundreds of cities, profitable cities on top of one another and make for a real business.
What do you tell your investors when they ask for the IPO or asking you for profitability? Do they ask you, or don't they ask at all?
Sometimes they ask, and what I say is, look, we have a moral obligation.
Mine ask more frequently.
That's probably true. We have a moral obligation to to ultimately find liquidity for the investors. But I think even more importantly, look, we have thousands of employees that own stock. Blood, sweat, and tears to make Uber a great company. And so I say we are going to IPO as late as humanly possible, but it will be one day before my employees and their significant others come to the office with pitchforks and torches. We will IPO the day before that. Do you get it?
Yes.
You're looking at me like you don't get it. Okay. This is the reason a lot of people say, like, Facebook went public. Well, when ultimately they had to create enough liquidity for their employees. And our employees work hard, and ultimately that stock, that equity that they work for should be liquid. And ultimately you should go do that, but if you can stay unbureaucratic, if you can keep your employees from having to, of refreshing on finance.google.com every 10 minutes to see what the stock price is, your company's going to be more geared towards the future and it's going to move faster.
So how patient do they have to be? 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years?
I don't know. Like I said,
Roughly.
It's going to be somewhere between 1 year and 10.
Dieter.
Yes, I had you there for a second.
You already mentioned Car2Go, you mentioned Blacklane, you mentioned MyTaxi, but competitors like Toyota, they have heavily invested in Uber. Volkswagen invested in the Uber competitor Get. Did you ever consider in investing Uber, or are there probably already secret negotiations going on with Travis? And I recommend you to do it here. There's no better place to announce a partnership than the NOAH conference.
I understand your position. But to say it clearly, an investment in itself, we could put in any company where we would assume that this would make a good business case, investing in and taking the money back sometime later. When we invest in this field, we do it for strategic reasons, and this has to go in sync with any kind of agreements what we want to do together. And therefore, if the one would be a given, the other one would be a logical consequence or part of it.
But why investing in Blacklane and not in Uber?
Blacklane, we have a dominating impact. We are learning, we are influencing the activity of this company. To accomplish the same with Uber, we would have to invest perhaps 35 billion or something like that. And we are a very, very profitable company, but that's not something we consider in the next 3 months.
Travis, would you like to have a Daimler as an investor in Uber?
I mean, how should I answer this one? The dominant impact thing is one I'd probably try to avoid if there was an investment agreement. But the $35 billion I'd be up for.
Actually, it looks like you are already doing business with Daimler. There are rumors around that you ordered actually 100,000 self-driving Mercedes S limousines. Can you confirm that?
I cannot. I have not signed a $10 billion check to buy 100,000 S-classes. As much as I'd like to put them in my garage, I have not made that deal.
Do you know anything about that deal?
I just want to say I met Travis first time this afternoon, but I'm always correct in what I'm saying. No, I can't.
Okay. Talking about investments, Dieter, Uber just surprised us the other day when they announced they took an investment from Saudi Arabia, 3.5 billion, into Uber by the state of Saudi Arabia. One of your biggest stakeholders is already Kuwait. Would you accept Saudi Arabia as a major investor in Daimler?
I mean, we definitely have no intention and no reason to increase equity in our company. Other than that, our stock is freely available, and we're happy basically about any investor buying our stock, and they don't have to ask us for permission.
Travis, Do you understand that there has been criticism on Uber taking so much money from Saudi Arabia?
I mean, there was some, but I think for the most part, people saw a couple things.
I mean, you know that Saudi Arabia is not only investing in companies like Uber, but they are financing around the world a lot of things we actually do not like so much.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
And so I think there's two things. One, is Uber operating in Saudi Arabia? And the answer to that is yes, right? In a place where women cannot drive today, that is the law of that particular country, we are providing some kind of mobility solution for women in Saudi Arabia, which, by the way, 80% of our customers in Saudi Arabia are women. We believe, maybe it's a pragmatic or practical approach, but we believe that's progress. And if we can take investment from a pension fund or investment fund in Saudi Arabia that is looking to lead the way in terms of economic and social reforms and invest in the thing that is bringing this kind of progress, not just on mobility for women, but also for entrepreneurism with the drivers and the partners that we work with, and invest in something that that inspiration started in Saudi Arabia, but it was also global, that's positive. We're going to take that money and do more empowerment of women. We're going to take that money and we're going to bring more mobility to cities and bring that positive impact to Saudi Arabia as well as the rest of the world. And I think as they start to take their money and invest it in other things other than oil, other than those other things that we don't like, it's a pretty positive thing for the money that they're putting into Uber, given the kind of impact we're bringing to cities and to people's lives in those cities.
Dieter, as we saw in your presentation, self-driving cars are one of the really important future projects for Daimler. Is the self-driving car at the end a way to disrupt what Travis is doing?
Travis is smart himself, and I was extremely impressed when I visited Uber for the first time, a company which existed at that time, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, and is the poster child of a disruptive company for many other areas. That he said what keeps him awake at night is the thought, what threat could exist there which would disrupt his business model. And obviously came to the conclusion it's the autonomous car. And therefore, of course, we are from different angles going into a similar direction, and when we have our car to go, soon it will be car to come. And you will not go 400 meters or 200 meters to find a car to go, but you will push your iPhone or whatever smartphone it might be, and the car to go comes to you. And then we are pretty much in the same arena. And therefore clear, as I said, we can potentially, without confirming anything, cooperate in some fields, but at the same time, we might become competitors, and that is fine.
What is actually happening to all the Uber drivers once you are successful with self-driving cars?
Well, look, I think...
Because they are now your biggest asset.
Yeah, sure. No, I agree. You know, it starts with, you know, all the benefits. You have to first put in the context of what are all the benefits of self-driving. 1 million people a year die in cars every year. Tens of millions of people are injured. When the autonomous car is really doing its thing, that all goes away. And you think about the newspaper and the things we worry about, how many of those things match up to 1 million people dying a year? Not a lot. You talk about the time we give back to people, how cities change, congestion, pollution, drunk driving, all of this stuff going away. The positives are there. It is definitely progress. And then the question is, do you want to be part of the future or do you want to resist it? And in so many ways, Uber's DNA, our background is, well, in some ways changing how the taxi industry works. or how transportation and taxis work. And we don't want to be like the guys who came before us. We are going to be part of the future. And so then you say, how do we optimistically lead through it? It's going to happen. Google's been working on it for almost 10 years. Daimler's been working on it for decades. And a number of other companies are working on this. And so it's going to happen. And now the question is, how do you partner with cities? How do you partner in a way that optimistically leads through that transition? The upside, I would say, is that it's going to take a long time. It's not like all of a sudden the billion cars on the planet, like with the snap of a finger, are going to be autonomous. It's going to take decades for that to take place. And so it will be a slow ramp, not an instant one.
You're really the expert on that, Dieter. When will the future arrive regarding autonomous driving?
Well, I would say in 5 to 7 years, we'll have not everywhere without restrictions, but the first areas where we see fully autonomous cars in operation. Provided that the regulator accompanies us.
Coming to regulation, coming to the taxi topic. You're very successful in over 60 countries worldwide, but especially Europe is difficult. It's difficult ground for you, but it's not because the customers wouldn't like your service, it's due to regulation. Is Europe the enemy of innovation, and how do you want to overcome this regulation topic?
Well, first, you know, a lot of times when I talk to European regulators, I have to let them know that this is not just a European thing. This is something we see everywhere. It just so happens that in the US, we're 2 years ahead of schedule, because we started in the US earlier, right? And so we have similar problems in the US. I've had existential problems in cities across the US, and had those situations in Europe as well. They're just more recent here in Europe. Now, there are rules that are strange. There's something called the return to garage rule here in Germany, where if I call for a car, that's not a taxi, of course, and it's 3 minutes away, by law, that car has to go to its garage, park, and then turn around. And if the car just comes to me directly, that driver is committing a crime. That is law today here in Germany. And so there are a set of laws that make it so that there is no competition to a taxi, and it's anti-competitive and ultimately creates a situation where people aren't served. And so we have to tell that story. We have to tell the story of the upside for cities, tens of thousands of jobs, less pollution, less congestion, et cetera, but also talk about what are these rules and why do they exist. And I like to say the old rules, sorry this is going a little long, but the old rules used to be new rules. They used to be new and controversial. There was a time when those new rules were fresh, those old rules were fresh ink on paper, but they get to become old rules and then replaced by new ones as long as those new rules bend towards people and towards progress.
Especially Germany is hard, and you had to give up service in a couple of the cities. Have you given up on Germany, or are you moving on?
I'm very patient here in Germany.
Dieter, talking about regulation, in order to achieve innovation, growth, in order to achieve enough jobs, how has regulation been configured for the future? And could you imagine probably to support Travis in his fight against regulation? I mean, talking about the taxi market, I think every second taxi in Germany is a Mercedes.
I'm in general convinced if something provides benefits and is good, it will ultimately succeed. And when you focus your effort and your energy in defending against this change, you will ultimately suffer, if not die. And you're better off when you try to be part of this change and be the spearhead of this change. And that's why I'm never in favor of protection and any fences you put around you. I'm a friend of competition and of innovation and of investment into innovation. Therefore, in Europe, of course, we have to make sure that there's a level playing ground and that there are no unfair things going on. And when we discuss these tax issues, for instance, I think we need stronger regulation to avoid this tax evasion. But when it comes to innovation, we should focus on our own innovative power. And then we are up for competition with whomever, and then we will succeed.
Is it a correct impression that whereas in the US, especially in the Silicon Valley, technology is mostly seen as a chance to improve quality of life, especially here in Germany, new technologies are widely seen as a threat and not as a chance? And how could this happen due to the fact that we used to be a country for decades that loved their engineers?
I mean, the word German Angst is used in all parts of the world. So there seems to be something within our character which supports that. There are obviously other characteristics which help us to be relatively successful as well. But in any case, I agree with your observation, and this is a threat for us because standstill is certainly bringing us backwards. The good thing is that I haven't seen any new technology where so far their curiosity and the interest was so strong as in autonomous driving. When we talk about gene technology and many other things, it was all let us alone. In this case, most of the politicians want to sit in these cars and want to be the ones who provide for testing areas. So there seems to be some sexiness to that, and it's very important that we don't screw that up by any too fast and not responsible moves, because when there would be some negative things happen in a big scale, this could be a major setback. So I'm not asking for regulation which tomorrow morning allows everything to happen, but let's learn together how step by step to see what the technology can provide, safe, and then let's allow that and go the next step.
You've been now CEO of Daimler for 10 years. What do you think you can learn from Travis as CEO?
I mean, I mentioned one thing before. I was deeply impressed when he told me, well, I'm thinking who will disrupt me. And I have to change my business model, which is just starting and which is just succeeding at that point of time. So this kind of strategic forward thinking is extremely important. And I think we, as a tendency in Germany, we are long-term thinker as well. But the other element is guts. We need more courage. Of course, we have to look at risks. And of course, when you run a company with 280,000 people, you cannot just follow your gut feeling and say, well, if it goes wrong, then it goes wrong, so what? You can't do that. You have the responsibility for 280,000 families and the ones, your suppliers and so on. But still, in general, we need more guts, and that's the kind of cultural revolution we try to provide in our company. And I'm saying, well, let's become culturally Uber, or what Daimler has been 130 years ago, because we were a startup in a garage. No, at that time, we provided the garages. There would be no startups without us, obviously. Okay.
Travis, the other way around. You're already CEO for 7 years now.
Yeah.
What do you learn from Dieter?
So I visited Daimler in Stuttgart and got to see how they make cars. I was referring to that earlier. And as an engineer myself, and somebody who, with my dad when I was a kid would work on cars a lot, it's really amazing to see all of the refined execution and excellence that Daimler puts into making their product. And that starts with a vision for the consumer that is very aspirational. And so seeing something so refined is, in some ways, they're building magic that we've gotten used to. But guess what? When that thing goes autonomous, there's a whole new kind of magic about what that experience is going to look like in a car that's going to be very interesting and inspire. I think Daimler has the ability to inspire hundreds of millions, if not billions of people with a new way to experience moving around.
Question to you both. 50 years from now, who is bigger? Uber or Daimler?
Man, in 50 years, I'll probably be drooling on myself and not really able to do much because of all the stress that Daimler's creating by pushing me into this autonomous thing.
Dieter.
Who knows, 50 years from now, perhaps we are one company.
It's getting interesting. So, last question right now. Dieter, let's imagine you're coming to Berlin in 2030 and you're stepping out of the Berlin airport, which airport ever. Who will drive you then to the NOAH conference? A self-driving car, the Uber guys, or?
Well, in both cases, it would be a self-driving car.
Yeah.
As when horses were used to pull the carriages, and today they don't have this task anymore. We're having more horses than at these times. There might be the utilitarian part of transportation being more shared, more autonomous non-used, and still it will be a great thing to drive in a beautiful Mercedes Cabriolet in the nice surroundings of Berlin and enjoy just the fact of driving.
Travis, do you actually have a driving license and do you own a car?
So I own a car. It's a, oh, you're messing with me. Okay, I have a very old car. It's a 1999 BMW M3 convertible. Now, the alternator belt is broke, and my driver's license has expired, so it's been a while.
Travis?
I like that because I need objects of conquest.
Yeah, fair enough.
Travis, Dieter, thank you so much. We are in time. We did not announce a partnership formally tonight on this stage, but I saw a lot of partnership on this stage. Thank you very much. That was great.
Yeah, very good.
Das war super. Thank you so much. Dieter, es war toll.